Welcome to Almendra, the podcast that explores how to create real, measurable change. We are Bernard Lecuivre and Merle Becker, and together we bring you the people transforming the world through action.
Join us on a ride today on a bus filled with computers. Today's guest at Almendra, Arnoud Raskin, took this bus in 2011 and drove it to neighborhoods where he turned traditional help system upside down.
Today, Mobile School operates in 40 countries based on a sustainable business model. Arnoud, I'm so happy to have you here today. When you can't bring kids to school, you bring school to them. That's more or less your idea. And therefore, you've worked with the street-connected children for the last 2 decades already. What was the moment that made you realize that the conventional approaches to supporting street children are not enough and that we need something completely different?
Yeah, thanks first for the invite, and happy to be here. The story for me started at design school. I'm an industrial designer, product designer, so I've been trained to design all kinds of industrialized products. And while being at design school, I got a bit fed up with the stuff we had to design. At a sudden moment, we had to do a plastic disposable teaspoon with a feature to squeeze out the tea bag when you lift it out of your cup of tea to prevent you from dropping on the table. So these were the moments that I got confronted with the big why question, like, why would I put time in this? You know, my idea was like, get a napkin and clean it up, you know. Why should I design such a product? And in those days, I got, actually by coincidence, I ended up speaking with people working with street kids in Colombia. And they kind of told me about a community of 150 million kids cut off every basic need you can think of. You know, no education, no healthcare, no protection, whatever. It's not there. And as a young designer, having to design a product for my graduation year, like a thesis project, I decided to design a product for street kids. And this is how I ended up in Cartagena, Las Indias in Colombia in 96 to work on my consumer insights, as we call it in design. In the design world, you know, really getting to know your customer. And in those days, I got confronted with kids on the streets, working in the outreach team of the project in Cartagena for about 4 months. And this is when my eyes opened, and mainly where I noticed as well that the educational part of the outreach was not really working. We had like in the outreach team, we had like actually the main goal of outreach was going into the streets to try to convince the kids to come with us to shelters, to home, to enter rehab processes. But meanwhile, we offered like first line service, which was mainly healthcare and education. We had some materials to clean out some wounds, some medicine, and we had some backpacks with books, games, educational materials, some blankets we opened up, and then we started working with the kids. And in those days, I noticed that 2 things actually, that a lot of the kids that went to the shelters and the rehabs and the homes, that after a few days, weeks, they escaped back to the streets, which I thought was quite strange because, you know, you live on the pavement, you suffer on the pavement, and still when they offer you like a safe space in a shelter, you go back to the streets. So that was difficult to understand at first for me. And the second thing that I noticed was that education on the streets was not really working. We had to do shopping every 2 weeks because the kids nicked the material. They were sniffing glue, smoking crack. There were a lot of fights. If we had like a few kids that focused like for more than 5 minutes in an educational activity in street education, it was already a big achievement. So I noticed like we have like beautiful goals here, but the reality is not really matching. So this is where I started thinking about what can we do better in education. Mm-hmm.
And do you understand now why they re-escaped on the street?
Yeah. And actually, thanks to those kids in the streets, and that's what consumer insights is about, you know, like really getting in the shoes of the people you work for, you design for. And I started to understand it actually with one specific story, because I couldn't speak Spanish in those days, and I had to get to know my new customers, the kids on the streets. And yeah, if you don't speak their language, you're not really well positioned. So I needed a very creative way of interacting with them. So what I did was I bought a booklet, like an empty school booklet, and I took it to the streets, trying to convince them to work with me. And there was a kid named Julian, typical street kid. I approached Julian with my booklet and I told him, like, Julian, mi español es muy mal. And he confirmed, like, yeah, you're right, you know. So I asked him, like, tú mi profesor, do you want to become my teacher? And he accepted as well. So we settled down on a carton board and I started making drawings in a booklet and asked him, like, ¿qué es eso? I drew a house, a bird and a tree. And then he wrote casa, pájaro, árbol. He gave it back to me. I tried to read it out loud, which was not very successful. So he had a good laugh, corrected me. I made more drawings and we continued working like this.
So you actually turned around the help.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, when we stopped after an hour and a half, we had to go back to the office. I started realizing that Julian, who never ever focused more than 5 minutes in an activity, had been sitting next to me over an hour and a half. The next morning I was back because I had the agreement with Julian to have my clase dos, my second class of Spanish, but he was not around. So I asked another kid to be my teacher and the kid accepted as well. And it worked fine again until Julian arrives and he sees me sitting with the other kid and he gets like angry and picks the fight and he claims like I'm his teacher. And this is where I started understanding the main problem. And the main problem indeed is that these kids are completely disempowered because of the rejection they suffer in society. But I started to understand that the approach, the way that we build relations with them in social work often is very disempowering as well. You know, the streets are bad for you. Come with us. You know, we know what is good for you. We're going to help you. We're going to support you. All these relationships confirm them that they're the lousy losers down there that need support. And because of my incapability to speak Spanish, I related with the kids. And I proved in practice to the kid that I needed him, that he was relevant to me, that he had impact on me, that I missed him when he was not around. And this is where I started understanding that in the whole the rehab cases as well, the kids that were successful were the ones that intrinsically motivated, started the process. So they took the decision themselves that they wanted to change and to shift. The ones dropping out were kids where we just persuaded them into social work, most of the time with a very paternalistic approach of the streets are bad and we have the positive offer, not understanding that the street for them was a very positive opportunity to escape a situation of domestic violence in a slum or sexual abuse in their families. Not understanding that the street for them often is the first space where they found friendship, belonging, and so on. So having that single view of streets being bad and or shelters and homes being good is very paternalistic, I think. And this is where we shifted. Mm-hmm.
Arnoud, I can't help myself but ask, you work in 40 countries worldwide. How do you position your work in the context of critics around the white savior complex? You as a European, Belgian white man bringing education to children in the global south.
We leave the work to the locals. We're not in the global south anymore. The only thing that we do is co-create with them, facilitate the processes of R&D, you know, creating new educational tools and materials in collaboration with them, designing the tools, finance it, and make them available for the youth workers and the local educators. And then we have sessions where we train, where we learn from each other. Like recently we had in Kolkata in India, we gathered all the partners of Asia and they worked a week together learning from each other, and we kind of facilitate that process as one of them. But the first line work in interaction with the kids, that's not us, that's them. And our role is to listen to them in trying to create the right tools. And we run mobile schools as well in Europe. We have mobile schools in very different realities, but it's always in a context of urban poverty. And I think there is a lot of interesting stuff in having these European experiences, African experiences, Latin American, Asian experiences, and the exchange of knowledge and so on. But we will leave them in power. That's actually what we do educationally with the kids. It's all about self-determination. So it's autonomy, it's competence, and it's belonging. But we approach our partners in the same way. They have full autonomy. We help them to build up more competence. We support on that side as they help us as well. It's a relationship that functions in both ways. But there is the belonging as well. We're a movement. We're in this together. We pull those mobile schools in the streets, and we know that this is happening as well in Kolkata, and that's happening in Durban in South Africa, and in Cali in Colombia, and in Antwerp in Belgium. So it's those three things. It's self-determination, I think.
So it's a very global approach here, but how do you finance all this work in all these countries?
We used to do that when we took off. We used to do that with philanthropy. So I was so lucky that as a young 20-year, I bumped into an entrepreneur's family over here in Belgium that gave me the seed money to start up the nonprofits. So I was able to professionalize the work that I started with as a student entrepreneur, social entrepreneur in the 90s. But after working with philanthropy for many years, I discovered an inconsistency in the model, and the inconsistency is there are a few parts that I have to explain. The first thing is that we preach sustainable development. When somebody is in poverty, we don't give them a fish. It's about helping them to get to the point where they can take care of themselves. But if I translate this to the mobile school methodology, that means that when the shoeshine boy approaches us and tells us, like, I'm starving, and he opens his hand and he asks for money and food, we tell him, like, no, we don't give fish, but we have a financial literacy toolkit. We have a street business toolkit. We can work with you to help you to make your business stronger so that you can prevent to get into this situation in the future. So that's the positioning that we take to the kid. But after a while, I started to understand that every euro I needed to reach that kid, to preach that story, was fundraised. So I was begging for money. I held my hand open, asking for money, because we were working with the poor kids. Because if you go fundraising, the most efficient thing to do is to sell the poverty of those kids, which is not consistent again, because we believe in them. So I need to believe in them as well in my narrative fundraising. I need to sell their strengths, not their problems and their misery, I think. So there was another inconsistency. So I said, like, if I want to be part of system change, you need a vision on how society could look better, but you need to be that vision as well. And in your personal leadership, you have to be damn straight on this one. So I decided, like, hey, if I believe in sustainable development and preaching this to the shoeshine boy, the only way of doing this in the right way is when I start fishing myself as well. So I decided in 2007 to start up a business, and we created a business, StreetwiZe, which is a leadership development company. And actually, in the leadership development company, we mainly tap into the street communities for the learning. So it's a cocktail. What we do in leadership development is a cocktail of street savviness combined with academic backbone, of course, and with business insights. So we created leadership development. And when I started StreetwiZe, because that's the name of the company, what I did was, at the very first moment, was profiling the outperformers on the street. So the winners. This is positive deviance. This is not a general thing, but the kids that stood out, the champions in dealing with a world of high competitiveness, uncertainty, and so on. So we profiled them, and we asked ourselves, well, like, why them? And we found that within these outperformers, there was a specific mindset developed, which was a mindset of opportunity focus. They never complained. They were always busy with what can I do here and now to make it happen. And they had a very consistent opportunity focus. They were very agile and resilient. They were proactive and creative, and they could collaborate, but they could compete as well. And they actually mainly knew when to play which card, and they picked their battles right. And with those 4 skills that we found within these kids on the streets, and I made films with the outperformers, so they became part of the trainings. We created trainings that we started selling to companies to make their companies more street savvy, dealing with uncertainty, with high competitiveness, with crisis. And even here, we are very strict. Every time when we use a film of a kid in a commercial deal of StreetwiZe, it's kind of marked in Salesforce. And every few months, they get paid a royalty for the use of their video.
I just wanted to ask that.
It's always being very consistent in that model, I think. But this brings us to the point that we're like funding and not completely. Like last year, we were able to self-sustain 72.5% of the full organization with the revenues we make with StreetwiZe. But this is actually money that we earn positioning the street communities as experts in leadership development programs with big corporates and multinational companies, where they influence leadership, top leadership of companies, where they are seen as the experts in these programs as well. So you shift the paradigm as well, showing that these kids are not the problem. The problem is that we are not able to create contexts where the context where all these kids can develop their potential. But I always tell people, like if you can survive those streets for 2 months or 2 years, it can't be that you're a needy kid. You need to be very resourceful. Otherwise you won't survive those realities. And we stopped speaking about 150 needy kids, 150 million needy kids we need to go and support. We speak about the damn big opportunity of 150 million untapped talents we're after. So StreetwiZe helps us to be consistent in that positive narrative about the kids. And that's fundamental, I think, if you want to be part of the solution.
But then you're working with the outperformers.
No.
And what about those that in the marketing for StreetwiZe in the videos? But are there groups of kids that you can't reach, that you don't have a solution for yet?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We work with kids as well that are that deep in streets and in drugs that I'm quite convinced that they just have a few years to go in those streets. But still, that doesn't liberate us as society to the responsibility to humanize their few last years as good as we can do. Because in the end, we're responsible as a society that those kids ended up in those streets and in those addictions. So the question is as well, like, what is success and what is impact? And where do you put your money? And in StreetwiZe, indeed, the main concept of the StreetwiZe leadership is harvest with the outperformers. But the money goes back to, they get a royalty fee, but 100% of the profits of StreetwiZe are reinvested in educational programs for street kids in general. So these kids that just need the humanization of their last years, the money is going there as well.
You've thought a lot about the flow of activities, of financing, how to put a process lean and efficiently. We can hear that. For people who would like to launch such kind of project, what did you miss at the first start? What would you do differently? What was your biggest mistake, maybe?
That's a very difficult question. Although I made a lot of mistakes, but mainly the mistakes were the big aha moments and the biggest opportunities to grow and to develop further. But the main thing, what happens quite often, Bernard, is I get approached quite often by social entrepreneurs or people in the social field that tell us like, hey, can we come over and can we have a chat because we want to build a revenue generator ourselves as well, a hybrid model. And mainly ask them at first, like, interesting. And why do you want to do this? And then most of them respond to me, it's so hard to get the subsidies, there's so much competition in the subsidies and, the whole bureaucracy of subsidies. And you see that the main reason why they do it is because of the cash. They're just looking for cash. And what is fundamental for me, if you want to make this work, it's not just the cash, it's the system. It's really tweaking the system. And if that is not your motivation, I still believe that it's easier to win a grant in subsidies than to build a solvable, profitable business. So it's not an easy thing to do. For us, the real reason why we started off in 2007, 2008 was because what we were preaching to the kids on the streets was not what we applied on our own business model in the organization, and the lack of consistency. And I think, the motivation of building these hybrid models should be beyond getting access to new sources of income.
So there's a lot of purpose behind what you do. You're very purpose-driven. We can hear that. And I wonder, how do you measure impact and that? And I'm not speaking about output. I'm not speaking about the number of kids you're reaching, but really systemic change, system change. How can you measure that in your
it's very difficult. I could ask you the answer to this question because I'm desperately seeking to get like the exact formula. But what we do on impact, what we have done is you can easily measure output, and we even created an application, a software that we offer to the organizations that work with mobile school, and they use those software tools actually to get the data, like how many kids and what have we done with the kids and how often. But really bringing this to impact is difficult. In the application, we created tools as well to measure the emotional stability of the kids, to measure the evolution of their social network. Are those getting stronger? Their future orientation, all kinds of parameters that we try to link to empowerment. But what we notice as well is that the youth workers on the streets, they never ever get to that point of registering this. There is no culture of data collection, and you're constantly consumed by the kids. It's not easy as well to collect all that data. We designed the technology, but I have to be honest, the technology, the goal was that we could measure impact, but most organizations use it to measure output. But I can do this now in a very efficient way. So still proud of the tool. But how do you bring this to impact? What we have been doing is we created an impact scorecard. So an impact scorecard is actually an interpretation of the output to kind of bring it to a kind of an interpretation of impact. And how we do this is actually we gather as many stakeholders as possible of different kind, board members, youth workers, StreetwiZe facilitators, volunteers, management. We bring them together and we do sessions where they have to compare all the products we have in the organization. We show them 2 products and we ask them, like, if you look at the purpose of the organization, on which product you would vote, in which one would you invest? So comparing all those products, it gives you a ranking of the products. And I include the StreetwiZe products and the Street Smart products. So the mobile school tools and the business oriented tools. So you get like a ranking. And what we do then is we have like a kind of a debate sessions where we have all these stakeholders in and where they can challenge the ranking that they voted all together in a democratic way. And they have like, it's a methodology where they can challenge like this product should be lower and they can argue why. And there is a voting as well. And we decide in a democratic way if we lower it or not. But in this process, we can select the parameters that the stakeholders use in their thinking to bring a product up or down on the impact interpretation list. And we gathered these parameters and we found about 8 of them that were used by our stakeholders. And then we asked them to score all the products on these parameters in an exact number. And by doing so, we did some mathematics and we got to an impact number that is an estimation of a wide stakeholder community. And you need the wider, the better, in how we can translate the output into impact. And this is how we do it now. What is very important for me is, for example, what we do with the hybrid model. We could easily be a very successful organization reaching a lot of kids, but doing what many of our colleagues are doing with those kids as well, and competing with them for the grants, and claiming that we do it better than them. What I always tell my team, the fact that we involve StreetwiZe and that we bring business communities in. By the way, I fly top leadership into the streets of companies, learning leadership in collaboration with street communities. We do leadership programs in refugee centers. We do leadership programs in youth detention centers. So this is where we kind of innovate as well. And I think the fact that it's not about our scale or our numbers. It's about our efforts to, what we need to do is we need to stay in a kind of a research mentality, innovation mentality, trying to find better ways, and then just be open and to explain what we're doing. And by doing so, you inspire others. The only way of getting to the system changes is seeing impact as not ours. We only can contribute to the movement that generates the impact, if you understand what I mean.
That's very inspiring.
Indeed, this is highly interesting, because from the problem statement that so far we are unable to measure the systemic impact of educative and collective actions, and on the long-term impact, were you able to, with your own eyes or your team, to cross-check this long-term impact from the start of your students?
Of course, there is a lot of factual stuff that you can manage. We had Juliette, which is a girl I bumped into at one of the mobile schools when she was 16, selling coconut biscuits on the streets, and we made a film with her because she was an art performer. She got the royalties. With the royalties, she could go to university. She became a journalist. And years later, I contracted her, and she became our lead Latin America, managing and coordinating the whole network in Latin America. But I have as well a very, very good friend of mine, Juan Pablo, in Guatemala, who was a street kid in the 90s when I worked on the streets myself with him. His story is heartbreaking. He was dumped in the city at the age of 5, street life. He was doing well in rehab, and then he got abused by a volunteer. It's a heartbreaking story. But through everything he has done, because we have been part. We had the honor to be part of his process. But right now he runs a parking in Guatemala City. It's open space. It's in the streets every morning again. At 4:30, he's there to claim his pavement. And there are a lot of people from businesses that come and park their motorcycles on that pavement. He's not just receiving a propina, like a tip, as many of them do it, on the streets, but he has built consistent relationships because of bringing trust to those people. People pay him for a month. People hand over the keys of the motorbikes, and he has created a business on the streets in a context that many of us would be crying. And he has his one room apartment, all done by himself. And if I compare my story with the story of Topo, I grew up in my golden cage. Education was paid for me. If I look at the trajectory that I did in my life, and I compare it with that of Juan Pablo, there's one to applaud, and that's Juan Pablo. So Juliette became more manager of Latin America, which is fantastic. But Juan Pablo's story is incredible as well. On the other hand, I had a phone call one day, and now I was approached on LinkedIn by a guy, and he's one of the guys involved in Too Good To Go, the applications against food waste. Jonas Malisse, he's one of the Belgian guy that was in this. And, Jonas is a very visionary and talented entrepreneur, and he's part of the success of Too Good To Go. At a certain moment, he contacted me by LinkedIn and he told me, like, Arnoud, if you have time to go for a beer, I would love to get to know you, because when I was at school, you came over to do a keynote. And it was after your keynote that I decided to do something with impact. Now, I have nothing to claim about the impact of Too Good To Go, but that's what I mean with the how we can create system change. It's not about me. It's not about Jonas. It's about the evolution. So there is a lot of stuff we can talk about and we can tell. But the main thing is to really the research mentality, the innovative spirit, we have to realize, I think we all have to realize that we're all part of the problem as that we can be part of the solution. So we always can do better. And we haven't found the solutions yet, but much more than ever, I think, in this world on fire and with all the polarization and the very top toxic macho political leadership in the world right now, we need positivity, and we need people that pick up that role of ethical, how to express myself, you know what I mean, that kind of leadership, leadership where it's not about you to be on stage and to be celebrated about, I don't want a Nobel Peace Prize, that's not why we're in. We and I never would get one, but you know what I mean. It's about the system change. Yeah.
You say we need positivity, but sometimes we just don't have it in the morning when we see the news. What song are you listening to still, get you up and make you go out and go on doing good work?
Yeah, there is one song I was thinking about, like yesterday it was International Women's Day, and we were just speaking about, or I was just speaking about the toxic macho male leadership we have in the world right now. And there's one song of Vivir Quintana. It's a song, Canción Sin Miedo, and it's a song. I will send you a link to a very beautiful recording with a woman's choir in Mexico City, and it's a song claiming rights. It has the fighter spirits. It's a song that when I listen to it, I'm ready for the battle. The positive battle. It gives me a lot of energy to stand up and to fight back to that system, as many ladies have to do as well in this world today. So let's go for that one. Vivir, Canción Sin Miedo. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We'll put that on our playlist. Thank you, Arnoud, for remembering us that when we're part of the problem, we can also be part of the solution. We'll surely closely continue to follow your work. This is so interesting, and I can't wait to see what you're up to next with all these inspirational ideas and networking and global community building. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, and all the best.
Thanks a lot for the invite, and all the best with the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you, Arnoud.
Find the link to Mobile School in the show notes. And if this conversation sparked something, please share it. Also, we would love to keep in touch with you. Subscribe to our newsletter on almendra-impact.eu. We cannot wait to have you tuning in again for the next episode of Almendra Seeds of Change. See you.